One here, back with another Splinterlands video. So we are now going to finish up part 3 of my Conqueror Jacek series. If you missed parts 1 and 2, go check those out. In parts 1, it was my initial reaction to Jacek, why I liked the card so much. And then we just went over some of sort of the clear winners of Jacek. You know, blast monsters, big tanks that get additional speed and piercing. In video 2, we talked about part 2, we talked about the top 5 most underrated cards that would get a boost from Jacek. So that was a really fun video to make. It was kind of long, but I highly suggest going to check that one out. There's cards that, since that video, have picked up in value, and cards that haven't. So there's some interesting plays in there that I think you could learn, you might be able to learn something from it. Now in part 3, I think there are two big, they're not exactly the same, but two big opportunities to take advantage of your opponent playing Jacek. The first of which is kind of just a strategy to neutralize Jacek. And then the second one is fully to take advantage of the downsides of Jacek. But before we get into those, I am Hawks21. I make Splinterlands content almost every single day. If you love this blockchain-based video game, just like I do, I would encourage you to stick around, check out my channel, and it would be awesome if you could like and subscribe. Okay, so let's head over to Peak Monsters. People are starting to recognize the value in this ability more, and I touched on it slightly in the last one, but camo. And what's cool about this is right now I'm on Peak Monsters. I'm doing modern, regular. What's cool about this is if you look, 5 out of the 6 monsters that have camo have it from level 1, right? So you can play this in novice, you can play this in bronze. And Scattershot doesn't hit camo. So one way to protect some of your backline monsters, and then maybe even sort of set up traps for, and you could do this not playing Jacek, right? Bulldog made a video on sort of the camouflage meta where you can protect some of your best monsters in the back. But with Jacek, it could be particularly interesting just realizing that you're going to most likely be getting a lot of ranged and magic damage from your opponent. Just with the idea of spreading that around your back line to, your opponent's going to want to wipe out your weaker monsters in the back. But what you could do is, and if you notice, 3 of these are neutral. So at any time, you could have 4 camouflage monsters, in your lineup. And the other cool thing is Venator has Reflection Shield, right? So think about this. At the higher levels, I think Scavo gets it in gold, right? Yeah, he gets it in gold. What you could hypothetically do is play Venator, Scavo play Venator in the 3rd position, play Scavo in the 4th position, play Dr. Blight in the 5th position, and play Countess Sinash in the last position. And basically all of these cards are going to be untouchable. Ideally, you'd want to play someone in your top 2 that has shield to take advantage of the repair. Or, you could do the same strategy where you just only do it with 3. And you put Venator in the 4th position, Blight in the 5th, and Countess in the 6th. And that's going to protect these 2. Because they can't be targeted and he can't be wiped away with blast. So if someone hits the position next to him with blast, he won't take any blast damage. So it basically makes it impossible for your opponent to get to these 2 cards, or these 2 or these 2, without first going through the ones in front of it. So you could see a strategy where, let's do let's say you do that 4 strategy at the higher levels, then you put Almo in the 1st position with Magic Reflect, Return Fire, right? then you put, these are obviously expensive cards, and there's other cards you could play. Oh, didn't mean to do that. And then put Cornelius in the second position. Same thing, Magic, Reflect, Return Fire at the highest levels. You'd create a situation where they could only fire at those two. And regardless of whoever they hit, they would be sending it back, either Magic, Reflect, or the Return Fire. So that's just sort of an interesting strategy to neutralize Jacek. Again, it can be run now with any summoner. It's just when you're going up against Jacek, you're more likely to see, magic damage or range damage, assuming they want to take advantage of the Scattershot, right? So I guess like you could presumably do a bunch of melee and take advantage of the speed and the piercing. But I think for the most part, people are going to want to try to utilize the Scattershot. And that's just a way to neutralize it, using a bunch of camo monsters. Again, not like the most surprising thing. People have started using camo more and more. Specifically with Venator having Reflection Shield, it's a very easy way to hide. I particularly do it to hide Dr. Blight, obviously. But then I also will try to hide Jin Bilka under certain contexts, because he gets the 3 magic, so he can do a ton of damage. And then also the Countess Sanash. I haven't used the Magi Necrosi that much, but similar concept, where you can put multiple camo in the back, hide them with the Venator, who also has camo, and the Scattershot won't be able to get to them. So you can just neutralize Jacek a little bit. Okay, now let's get to the second strategy. This is the one I'm most excited about. Basically, you can take advantage of the Scattershot that your opponent has by knowing that it's less likely your first position card is going to take damage. So I'm going to explain that. Let's go to Taunt for a second. So let's pull up all the Taunt monsters. All of these, except for one, is mostly defensive. Mycelic Slipspawn is kind of a hybrid. Gets the 3 magic attacks, so it can attack from the back. But has the force field, right? So attacks 5+, will only hit for 1. So little hybrid. Wave Brood is defensive. It's great because it can attack from the back line with the 2 ranged, but the Void and Return Fire is what makes Wave Brood so good. Shield Bearer, obviously mostly defensive. Impossible to get through with all with the shield ability, all the armor. Return Fire, now with Grandmaster Wraith giving it Void Armor. And then, there's all the repairs and the heals and stuff in life. Shield Bearer's defense is insane. The Dark Han, same situation. 4 attacks, just like Shield Bearer, not terrible, but no one's gonna, mistake this card for being an attack first card. Has the Magic, Reflect, Void, Scavenger, Flying, all of those are defensive abilities. That leaves the Magnor. Now, the Magnor is an offensive taunt, which, again, the only one in Modern that is an offensive focused taunt. And so generally, for your offensive focused cards, you want to keep them alive for as long as possible. So actually, for the Magnor, him having taunt is a detriment to what this card brings to the table. Right, he has Enrage, Trample. When he gets enraged, all of a sudden you're talking like 8 attack, at the highest levels 9 attack. You would want your opponent to not fire at this type of card, right? Specifically if you were using Jacek yourself, and you had the additional speed and then the piercing, or even if you're using like a Kid Yuff, right? Give this thing piercing, or even Kitty, give it extra speed. You don't want people firing at the Magnor. That's unlike these other 4, where you want your opponent to fire at these cards for a variety of reasons. But for the Magnor, it would be in your interest to keep the Magnor alive as long as possible. And unfortunately, if we look at the fire and neutral, there is only one neutral protect monster, the Tower Griffin. And then there is only one neutral tank heal, the Tortigian Chief, and you don't get that until gold. When do you get the protect, actually? Protect, that is also gold. So you don't get those abilities from neutral cards, and these are very expensive cards, until gold. Sorry, let me go back to the Magnar. So, having your opponent having Scattershot is an advantage for the Magnar. Instead of everyone focusing on the Magnar and wiping him out pretty quickly, I like to say the classic phrase, Magnar's here for a good time, not a long time. Typically, Magnar's either going to win you the match within the first couple rounds, or it's going to get eliminated immediately, right? It's normally one or the other. The Magnar's not sticking around for, 10, 12, 15 rounds. He's either going to do a bunch of damage and decimate your opponent's monsters, or it's going to get wiped out. But this changes that a little bit, right? Because all of those scatter shots ignore the taunt, which again, I consider a detriment to Magnar, and we'll just let him run free in the front line without having to worry about being focus fired. And it's not just true for Magnar either, right? So if we quickly sort of just run through, I'll point out some particular cards. Like one that comes to mind is Grund. Grund, same thing, does a ton of damage, right? Double strike with these two big damage numbers, has the trample at gold. The problem is, Grum, doesn't have any defense. He's slow, doesn't have any defensive abilities. It's pretty easy to get through Grum if you're not distracting your opponent. So you could have a situation where if you know Jacek is coming, you could play Mycelic Slip Spawn, right? And put this at the front line, and you'd have a situation where you could just distract everyone constantly the whole time and just let Magnar let Grund sort of do his thing with his double strike and the trample in gold or higher. Another one. Oh, sorry. It is legendary, but it's dragon. Another one is, where do we go? Desert Dragon. So Desert Dragon, very easy to get through with magic, right? But if you know Jacek is coming and your opponent spams Jacek, you know that magic damage has a 1 through 6 chance of hitting any other card. So in this strategy, right, you wouldn't really want to play camo monsters because you would want to increase the chances that your big hard-hitting tank in the front wasn't taking the damage. I'll give you one more example. Actually, 2 more. We're going to go to life. 3 more. Uriel, same thing. Part of Uriel's problem is attacks every other turn. Does have the heal, so some longevity. But, doesn't have any magic defense either, unless you're playing Wraith. But now, if you know Jacek is coming, Uriel is not going to take as much damage as he normally would because it's all going to be spread out. Same thing with Jared Scar. Really powerful, low health, easy to get through. Play him in the front line, and again, all of the Scattershot will miss that first position. Most likely. Obviously, you could get really unlucky and it all actually ends up focus firing. Then the last one, there's others, it's countless, but Grum. The Grum's come down a little bit, but Grum, right? If you can keep Grum alive for as long as possible and he gets some bloodlusts going, that's going to be for an advantage of your team. So I'm going to stop it there. Basically the 2 strategies. First one, to neutralize him, is to use a bunch of camo monsters so you can sort of recreate the focus fire. The big thing there is playing the Venator as the first camo monster, so he can soak up any blast damage if the card before him gets hit. And the other one is using attack-focused tanks when you're expecting Jacek. And that's because the normal amount of magic and range damage that goes to the front line has a better chance of hitting the back line, right? That's the whole thing with Scattershot, is you can avoid that first position. Well, if your opponent is trying to avoid that first position, why don't you put one of your best cards in the lineup that you can run for an attack focus in that first position. So that's what I really love about this Jacek card, is it creates a lot of opportunities, but if you can see it coming, there are clear ways to counter it. You know, particularly, again, the one I just said, putting in the most attack-focused card you can in the first position, while all of their magic and range gets spread across the back line, and that card can just run through your opponent's team. Okay, that wraps up part 3 and the final part of my Jacek series. Again, I am Hawks21. I make Splinterlands content, both here on YouTube and on Twitter. You can find me at Hawks21 Gaming. Come say hello on both platforms. I love responding to comments. I try to respond to every single one here on the YouTube video, and love getting into Twitter conversations. So yeah, have a great day, and I will see you around the game.